Okay, so we are all here, right? Okay. So welcome to the first of 3 days of the ReaBua screenings of the what is this again? The 16 days of activism. But I hope that everybody is, live and ready. Without actually wasting time, I'm going to introduce myself and then allow for everyone to introduce themselves so that we can quickly go to the first screening of the two videos. The first video will be the Alter Red, and the second one will be the Brandfort Banishment, Winnie Banishment. So thank you so much. I am Lungile Dube, lifelong fellow at Tekano, and today I'll just moderate the event, and I'll pass it on to the two ladies.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Nola. I am a feminist journalist. I'm also an Atlantic Fellow for Racial Equity for 2021. Thank you so much for having me on with you this morning, Lungile.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ntobaleng Moraike. I am a lifelong fellow at Tekano. I am a researcher and a political educator as well. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having us, Lungile.
Thank you, ladies. We are expecting another one, Tracy. I'm not sure if I'm shouting. If I sound loud, it's probably because my background is very loud, so I don't have an option right now. But before we just go to the first screening of the video, which we are hoping Sean will play for us. I have like a small thing, a piece I want to say regarding today's screening and further discussions on Winnie. Mom Winnie Mandela, according to me, was she continues to be a torch, drawing everyone's attention, and the Duke power when they said she multiplied. When it was she multiplied, using the Duke as a symbol of how everybody is in unity regarding Winnie's multiplication or multiplying. It brings me back to how it's such a beautiful metaphor in terms of how a duke represents authenticity and how her um, living life through all of these experiences, resurrections, and like it was more of how authentic she was to herself, which made it authentic for her, easy for her to be authentic to the struggle that she was in. So I think today I'm thankful to be part of this. Thank you guys for actually allowing me to moderate. And as much as I'm not going to say much, I just wanted to share this small piece, and I'm passing it on to Sean. Thank you.
Zulu yemfihlakalo, Zulu yesimanga, ezalise umhlaba.
In May 1977, you are informed that you have been banished. You will make your home in the Orange Free State, in a tiny town called Brandfort. The house where you live in Brandfort is not even a metaphorical island. It is not on a large plot of land or on a farm so remote that it may as well be in the middle of an ocean. Instead, the small 3-roomed house sits alongside a row of others that look exactly the same.
The special branch, they brought it in Brandfort. They came with a big truck and then they just dumped this woman. We knew nothing about that because there were no newspaper by then in Brandfort. Unless you give somebody to bring you a newspaper from Bloemfontein, But the wives, they even tip their people who are working for them, their mates. Don't come near to that woman. It's very dangerous. Do not speak to that woman. It's a politique.
Your tiny house is in a township that local residents call Mogoatlhe. It is one of almost 1,000 houses, little grayish-yellow boxes, one exactly like the other, all of them too small to hold the dreams of those inside them. On the walls of many of them, there are likely to be framed pictures with captions that say, "Black is beautiful," and framed photographs of loved ones and certificates and albums stuffed with memories.
I used to pass through Winnie's place getting to school. So you find that even if you don't greet Winnie, Winnie would greet you. "Sakbona nkosikazi." She would stand in front of her house where she was dumped and say, "How do you leave people? Come here." And then you simply cannot run away when a person says, "Come here."
The restrictions of banishment mean you are not allowed to interact with people in groups. They are supposed to stay away, and only one person is allowed in the house with you at once. You never take it seriously.
The special branch, they were staying each and every night. Right up there is a hill, Bason Kop, right up there. They would stay there with their fruitcakers, looking at who is getting to Winnie's house and so on. No one should visit Winnie. She was not supposed to visit anyone. She was supposed to report at the police station at 6 o'clock every day, and she was not supposed to get to town. Hers was just restricted to be done in the house. Automatically, what they said you should not do, we would do it, as long as it is good for the blacks.
Well, I have lived most of my life alone. The best years of my life really have been those spent under burning orders. Exile here means virtually really being in prison at your own expense. And it is the extreme isolation that is very, very difficult. And of course, worst of all was being without my children and not having the opportunity to play the role of a parent, like all parents in democratic societies. Virtually both of us have really not had that opportunity to be parents to our children.
You are a woman who has learned to live without hope, a woman who has steeled herself against believing in the possibility of kindness, yet who simply can't help herself because hope is inherent in living. To give up on hope is to give up on possibility. And how can a freedom fighter lose hope?
So we used to have our meetings in church because we were now told we are no more supposed to get together. When he said, "No, Mafa, what are the women doing here?" Then I told him. Then he said, "No, I think you must open a crèche." Sure. In a township, small township like this, no one has been trained to run a crèche here. No, I'll make a plan. She was very active. Don't think it was going to take a week or what. 1, 2, 3, that. When he said, "No, just choose any women, I am going to send them in Soweto to go and observe how crèche is being practiced. So as to come and do, you must do something, Mafa. You must do something." That church, they were having a hall, and that hall was having a kitchen with a stove and full equipment. So those women, they allowed us to practice the soup kitchen there. The house that was what burned down, Winnie was practicing the clinic there. The medicines were from Chopek, from Dr. Mogoatlhe. So then it was bombed. She intended to build a garage and a storeroom to store the milimi. So they bombed that. It was in the night. A special branch.
That is why even exile is so worthwhile, because I'm absolutely certain that we shall attain our liberation. And even being in exile really is a constant reminder of the sickness of our society, and that we are virtually in prison, even in our country. Those who are outside prison walls are simply in a bigger prison, because the black man is virtually a prisoner, and all those other fellow whites and other groups that are as oppressed as we are all really in prison, in a bigger apartheid prison.
In fact, she is a social worker by profession, and she practiced her social worker, her profession in Brandfort freely, because the people of Brandfort would use Winnie. They used to call Winnie Mamani. If we are ill, even during the night, they would get to Mamani's place. Mamani said, just get a driver. You take this woman or take this person to the doctor, free of charge. Each and everyone, if you are hungry, Winnie would give you food. You're getting cold, Winnie would bring you a blanket, would solve your problem you are having for. So the people were so fond of Winnie.
How can you fight so hard for justice, an act that requires nothing but hope, while protecting your heart from the vagaries of hope? You understand intimately the pain at the center of this paradox. Hope will save your people, but if you have too much of it, hope will kill your soul.
This is the first graduation of Tusano Center. That is the name of Winnie Mandela's crèche. The first one she established in Brandfort, this one. This was a letter Winnie wrote in 1979, November, just wishing my family the best wishes because of giving her girl shoulder to lean against during those times, the bad times. Then she was just encouraging me, saying that I was the first one to come nearer to her.
Okay, so I would like to pass on to I would like to think maybe Nolwazi first to just maybe let us know how does the video that you just watched, the documentary, make you feel just as a woman in South Africa right now?
Sure. I think that the documentary that we just watched, first of all, is beautifully shot, and beautifully done. So I just wanted to say congratulations and thank you to the filmmakers that created it. But how does it make me feel as a woman in South Africa? I think probably proud and a little bit sad. Proud in the sense that the story of Winnie Mandela and her work, not just in Brandfort but across the country, is a story that Black women in this country can claim as one for ourselves, as we are part of that lineage. We are part of that history of women like Winnie Madikizela-Mandela, and so in that sense, reflecting on her legacy and watching film work made by Black women about her life story is really something that makes me proud, makes me feel very encouraged, makes me feel proud to be part of this lineage of Black women and to be almost the newest generation or one of the youngest generations in this lineage. I think it makes me feel sad because it speaks to really the brutality of the apartheid system in this country, and it makes me sad that so many Black women lived in that time under a kind of brutal system that didn't care for their humanity, for their families, for their children. I mean, to take a woman and uproot her from her community into a community where she knows no one and try to isolate her in that way. And when Mam Winnie speaks in the film about how she has spent the best years of her life alone and isolated, that's heartbreaking. And I think that for me, there's also a sense of anger as well, because the impact of apartheid and the lineage to use as a metaphor, what I was talking about earlier, of apartheid continues even today. So as we are a lineage of Black women that can claim and lay claim to the legacy of the likes of Mam Winnie, so the apartheid system has its own lineage that has continued to reproduce itself and brutalize Black women and Black queer people in this country, even in 2021. And that makes me enraged. That makes me really, really angry as a Black South African woman.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Molwazi. Very fruitful. Ntamaleng, as a researcher, right? I understand that we have feelings as researchers, although somewhere somehow it seems as if some people are just thinking that researchers are computers. As a researcher and a young one, and watching that video, the concept of Winnie, the concept of Winnie having to dodge these bullets, there's, poisonous darts that society has thrown at her, the media has thrown at her, that she should be sorry for the things that she was very toxic for, very improper leadership, exclusive, those type of things that you hear there and there, whilst there's this beautifully captured video of the banishment of Winnie. How do you feel, and what can you say to this whole, concept of Winnie having to be asked to, apologize or be apologetic for being the power that she was?
Thank you, Lungi. I think firstly it's important to, Nolwazi said something so powerful now around apartheid having its own lineage. And I think the representation and the person that Winnie was portrayed to us growing up, even today, actually, right, is part of that lineage. There has been a very deliberate brutalization of her image, a very deliberate, just weaponizing her feminist leadership to sort of present it as less than, firstly, but also in ways that doesn't make her get positioned as the leader that she was and still is for us in our generation. So I think that's one thing to sort of note, that when we think of Winnie, and I think I think people don't allow Winnie the ability to be as multifaceted and as plural as all of us are, right? We are all complex human beings, and I think people then talk about her as this or that, either or, right? Which I think is really unfair. Really unfair because everyone is like that. So yeah, I think so that as part of talking about apartheid and talking about the brutalization of Black people, of Black women under apartheid, it's important to also take note of the media also as having played a huge role, right? But it's not just that. I think another thing to also recognize when we speak about Winnie, which is something that also I think we don't talk about a lot, is the aspect of erasure, especially perpetrated by people who are or were her comrades, right? That when we talk about I mean, in the film, she said something around, she spent most of the best years of her life alone, and she also reflects on how it felt being banished, being in exile. But even in post 1994, one could even argue that that same feeling of being banished continued, right? I mean, there was aspects when she was a member of parliament, for instance, how she was treated as someone that liked attention, right? Those are aspects of patriarchy that are used by people that we march with, are people that we call our comrades, to continue, quote unquote, put women in their place, right? Which is really problematic. So I think it's really important that when we problematize the role played by apartheid in policing, in brutalizing, in banishing Winnie, we also need to also reflect on how that even continued in post 1994 South Africa. And it was done by people, by her comrades, by people that she put her life on the line to make sure that their legacies were intact. Because I mean, it's true. We can't talk. A lot of us wouldn't have known who Dada Madiba is without Winnie, right? She kept his name alive. But post 1994, the same kind of erasure, the same kind of brutalization, now not in the hands of whiteness or in the hands of apartheid, but now in the hands of patriarchy, committed by her comrades as well. And I think even in post 1994, we see that continuation of that brutalization, even in the media, be it sort of reducing her to what patriarchy wanted to make her to be, reducing her to someone who was always late, to someone who was all those things are part of a patriarchal system that exists within a broader system of white supremacy, of colonialism, neocolonialism, of cis heteropatriarchy. To say to Black women, to say to Black feminist women, especially, right, Black women who are so deliberate about being deviant, in the construct of what our society says we ought to be, to say to those women that we're going to punish you. And I think Winnie, I mean, she's a reflection of that. She's a reflection of what happens to women in our society who dare to have a voice. What happens to women in our society who dare challenge power, right? Because she's continuously challenged power. She challenged patriarchal power. She challenged white dominance and white power. And as a result of that, she has been severely punished by all these systems of oppression. Thank you, Lungi.
All right, thanks, Deba. Noloizi, do you want to maybe jump into the point that Deba raised regarding media? Because I was just about to ask about the propaganda, of journalism in trying to portray what, they want for their own personal or professional gains with a figure such as Winnie.
Well, I think it is not a secret that there was a sustained and very deliberate and very sophisticated media war against Winnie Mandela during apartheid. And the likes of Stratcom, who were created not just to wage this war against Winnie, but against the struggle for liberation and freedom in this country in general, and the ways and it's no secret that the media in this country was used in particular kinds of ways. I think that for me, as a practicing journalist in South Africa right now, and a journalist who is Black and woman and queer and feminist, I think that it becomes really important for us today to reflect on what the role of the media in this country is currently, what it has been and what it should be. And I think that Mum Winnie's life becomes a really nice background or context with which to have that analysis. Because if you remember, during apartheid, the SABC, what we know as the SABC right now, was something called a state broadcaster. And there's a difference between a state broadcaster and the ways in which we are trying to construct the SABC now as a national broadcaster. A state exists for the state and for state machinery and for a government to govern in particular kinds of ways. It is a tool of oppression and brutalization, a state broadcaster. And what we tried to do, with the SABC post 1994, and I mean, there has been a lot of criticism, and I'm one of the people, as a practicing journalist even, that criticizes this. But there was a project to turn the SABC from a state broadcaster into a national broadcaster, into a broadcaster that would ensure that accurate and fair news and broadcasting would be given to the citizenry, a broadcasting and an information service that served the nation before it served the state, and in fact should not serve the state at all. I, today as a journalist in 2021, think that in some ways we're failing at this as journalists. If you look at the various ways in which media practitioners have been used for political means and political ends. If you look at the state of the SABC currently, as a result of various, nefarious political actions by people who were allowed to get their hands on what is a really important public good in this country. And I think that we should be concerned as the citizenry, as active citizens in this country, especially as women, especially as Black people, because it is our stories that are then pushed to the margins of society. It is our stories that are mishandled. It is our lives and our deaths that are the ones that will make headlines in particular kinds of ways, and in ways that are dehumanizing at the end of the day. And so if we have a media, in particular news media, that does not handle the lives of Black women, of queer people, of the most vulnerable people within our society with care, then we have to be very concerned. If we do not have a media that is impartial, that is fair, that does not allow for itself to be used for political machinations, then we should be very concerned about that. And so I think for me, as we talk about the media and Mum Winnie's legacy, and really as a journalist today, that is where my mind is at. That is the thing that is top of mind for me, and the thing that keeps me up at night is the fact that we are not being vigilant enough on the state of our media in this country. And as we have seen, the media is a very powerful tool and is something that belongs to all of us as a public, and something that we should take ownership of and be very vigilant of how our media is run and how it is that editorial decision making is done. Because we saw with Stratcom what the media can do, not just to one person's life, which was Mum Winnie, but to an entire struggle and to an entire community of people. And we should remain vigilant today.
Thanks, Nolozi. So in the documentary, Mama Nora says, she specifically, and I think she chose the words that she used, she says they just dumped this woman. And I feel for me that just brought a little bit of, because when I say I mean like a very, it triggered something, because we might be talking about the fact that they dumped a live body to within a community that she didn't know, and she was alone, and she had to rearrange her life and reintroduce herself. But within today, when someone says dumped, a lot of things come to mind, especially for us young women. So what comes to mind for me is the dumping of dead bodies of young women. And I'm trying to see, like, it's happening on its own. It's connecting the living of everyday fear factory of one day you might find a dumped young woman's body, and it might not come maybe through, but it looks like the term dumped, it's like Mum Nora used it, intentionally, to say that it might be a live body that was brought to Brandfort, but how did she sort of resurrect and become human again? Do I make sense? Do I make sense, Itabaling?
Um, yes, you do make sense. Yes.
Yeah, because I just have that, and I just want to dump it on you guys again to say, what is it that you think? One, why did Mam Nora use these words? Maybe it might just be me who's very, picky about words, but also might it mean something that she also felt was happening at that time, dumping something and them having to play a role in in bringing back to life of this thing.
Okay. So I think it's important to maybe also look at generally the political economy of townships in South Africa, and how even taking Winnie to Brandfort was strategic, deliberate, um, and also very symbolic, right, of what the apartheid government thought of the place, and also what they thought her being there would do for her, right? So I think generally, based on just the legacy of colonialism, the legacy of apartheid, currently the legacy of the triple challenge of unemployment, of poverty, of inequality, and just generally gendered structural violence, the townships in South Africa right now really represent people who are mostly forgotten, right? I mean, a lot of townships exist without services, right? And I mean, even when we link that into a broader gendered question, right? So I'll make an example. Um, there's a trend, particularly with femicide cases in South Africa, right? That every time a man kills a woman, and yeah, especially with like prominent or like more economically secure men who kill women, they'll go and dump their bodies in a township, right? So we saw what happened, with when Uyinene was murdered. She was murdered in Claremont. The perpetrator went and left her body in Kailicha. In the case, femicide case, I think of Chris Payne or something, in the Eastern Cape, the same thing happened, where a woman was killed close to where she stayed, and then they went and dumped her 30 kilometers in a township nearby. And I think there's two things that come out for me in those way. That the first one is that there's an awareness of the gender structural violence that happens in township, that also impacts the allocation of police resources, right? Knowing that if you take someone and you put them there, the chances of them being found are lesser, right? Because of the allocation of police resources, which the High Court in 2018 actually claimed that as it is right now, it's discriminatory, and the allocation of police resources is discriminatory, and it also discriminates on the basis of poverty and class, right? So there's that aspect. But I think another aspect is that there's also a way in which Black poor women are deemed and positioned to be disposable, right? So almost like your life doesn't matter. I think generally, actually, as a Black woman in South Africa, right, systems around you, right, the fact that you're so unsafe in your own house, you're so unsafe outside. You spoke about, Pumla Gola's Fear Factory, and how like literally our lives are so governed by this fear, right, which is so legitimate because everything around us does not reflect and doesn't say that we're safe. So I think those things are saying to us as women, as Black women in this country, that really our lives don't belong to us. And I think I want to link that I guess the question and just a broader narrative of banishing, that in post-apartheid South Africa, for us right now, I think gender-based violence and femicide and just general gender structural violence that really is heavily imposed and seen and highlighted in the lives of Black poor women, that there is a continuation of this banishment, right? That this banishment maybe doesn't look like the apartheid government coming and taking us to a place, but it's Black women in South Africa automatically placed under really harsh restrictions because of the conditions that come with being a Black woman in this country. So I think for me that's important, that even when I think last year we started talking, in this year I started talking about curfew, but you're like, Black poor women have been on automatic curfew forever, right? Because they don't have street lights, right? So that also restricts the times that you can go out. You can't go out for a run as a Black woman in this country in these conditions because someone will steal you, right? You can't be in your own house because you'll be killed and raped and murdered in your own house. So I think even that legacy of banishing, it continues right now in very different ways at the hands of men, at the hands of patriarchy. And I think, yes, Mamnora's words may have been very deliberate, and I think, like I said, it does reflect that they were putting her in this small town that she doesn't know anyone, but also as a deliberate act of excluding her, right? But I think what we learn from Winnie as young activists, as young feminists, is also that wherever you are, you have that responsibility to really continuously speak truth to power. She didn't get there and was like, okay, they've really decapacitated me. I don't know what to do. I can't speak the language. I don't know what to do. But she really went on there and continued to do really amazing activist work, I mean, with the crash, for instance. I think what's so amazing for me about Mam Winnie is that while men, right, who were given the social capital and who were given the platform and the space to talk and not be problematized, were talking about socialism, Winnie was actually in Brandfort living socialism, right? She didn't say, oh, I think for me it's so amazing that she wasn't going around talking about the politic. She lived the politic, and I think she really is the true embodiment of the feminist saying that the personal is political. Because she did that, she went there and she lived the politic. She showed the people in the community what it means to be a Black feminist, what it means to be an activist, what it means to be a socialist, by practice and by using her skills and the things that she does to really build a community. I mean, even Mamnora in the film talks about how everyone calls her Mamani, and how she went in there and really became the social worker that she was trained to be. And I think it's that aspect that even when women are systematically erased from platforms like they tried to do to her, that they just go into these platforms and they just do amazing things, and you can't erase that. You can try, but you can't. So I think for me that's so powerful that while the others were talking about socialism, Winnie showed us what actually feminist socialism can look like.
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in there, Lungile. I think that Ndebeleng has said something really powerful about when the apartheid government takes Winnie Mandela and puts her in Brandfort, it is a representation of what they think of the place, and then goes on to speak about how it is that young, mostly Black women are killed, and they're killed in suburbia, in places where people with money and the middle class live, but then their bodies are then dumped in townships. It happened to Karabo Mokoena as well in Johannesburg. And we've seen many of these kinds of cases. And I think for me, it speaks about not only that, I mean, I grew up in a township, but it speaks to not just township communities not just being forgotten by the apartheid government and even by the post-apartheid ANC government, but really it speaks to the idea and the conceptualization and the construction of townships as a place where you go to ukulahla umuntu, is a place created to to be what, in Zulu language we say doesn't exist, which is umgqomo womuntu awukho, awukho umgqomo wokulahla umuntu, which is to say there is no dustbin to throw away a human being. And yet townships were constructed to be that by the apartheid government, and continue in many ways to be that because of the failures of the current post-apartheid government. And then it becomes very important if you realize this construction. Winnie Mandela's work in Brandfort then becomes even in Soweto, becomes even more important and even more poignant and profound, because she continues to see those people that have been, quote unquote, thrown away, those communities that have not just been forgotten, but deliberately thrown away and discarded. She continues to see them through the full complexity of their humanity, and continues to see those communities as fundamentally human, right? And fundamentally human in the sense that she then does work that allows people to exercise their own agency in taking care of their communities. So it doesn't come and take over things in this very, patronizing and paternalistic way, but works with the existing community structures in a way that recognizes their humanity, and also, I think, emboldens their agency. And I don't want to say gives their agency back, because agency is something that is innate and inalienable, but allows the people's agency to come alive in the ways in which she does this work, be it in Soweto, be it in Brandfort. And I think that is such an important thing to think about when we talk about and think about the humanizing of the Black body, or the Black woman body, and the queer body, right? That have been brutalized and dehumanized in particular kinds of ways. Because I find even as we become activists of whatever kind and move from these townships and get a particular kind of distance from these places and our own people, we tend to do work that becomes patronizing, do our work in ways that become patronizing, when we speak about poor people in a very othering kind of way, right? Because you've sort of survived and transcended, etc. And to keep in mind that Umam Winnie was able to do the work and live the politic in a way that didn't further dehumanize people, but saw them and respected their agency, to create a creche and allow the community to do the work in that creche, and simply just mobilize the resources and leverage the access that she had to do work in a community, I think is a very powerful thing. And I think I would be remiss to not mention that I think her work with the Manyano women in Brandfort, which Umam Nora talks about, is also quite powerful, because churches are a tool of colonialism to dehumanize Black people. Churches are important in the conceptualization of the white identity, and therefore the Black identity, in ways that to decide who is human and who is 3/5 a human, right? The church was a very big part of that project, and the project of slavery, and even apartheid, right? And for Black women to be able to continue to organize within churches, to build structures within churches that affirm the humanity of Black people, speaks to you to the absolute magic that Black women are, particularly when we organize. That's all Mama Bomanyano exist within a church, the structure that is created and brought onto this continent as a way to dehumanize us. And they take that and they leverage that and use that to take care of their communities in various ways, I think is a silent revolution that we need to start speaking about. And it is a silent revolution that Umam Winnie Mandela was a part of. As you know, the last one of the last photos I saw of her was in church uniform, but also one that she leveraged because she understood that kind of power. And I think for me, it's really an important thing to look to and think about as we try and create and craft an activism for today, and as we try and figure out what kind of ancestors we want to be, and what kind of legacy we want to be, and what contribution we want to give to this lineage.
Thanks, Nolois and Dips. So just building on what you guys have just walked into, I had something also arranged there in terms of her playing the role, regardless of the fact that she was somewhat dumped by, the government, thinking that they are erasing her, and also comparing that and, like to the dumping of young black women in townships, wherever the murder has been, took place or the crime took place. Um, so there was a critique in about Sisonke Msimang's book, where she talks about Winnie Mandela's dad giving her a gift. I think the gift was how she groomed her, how she raised her, and for the fact that she comes from a Ponderland royalty family, but she had to rebuild her own character, around this new woman in the struggle. So probably for the sake of her children and her children's children and every other woman in South Africa and globally. But the critique was that her positionality gave her the ability to come in and lead. So if you are coming from a township, if you're coming from a rural, poor background, if you are the other that you just mentioned, it is impossible. So the critique is that, well, if she didn't do it, who else would? Because she had the power. So what's your take on that? Maybe um, that perspective.
Sure, Lungile. Who do you want to answer the question?
Okay, so any one of you would, okay, so let's say Ntebaleng, if you might.
Lungi, sorry, I didn't get the question properly, so maybe Nolazi can start and then I'll just but I didn't understand the last part.
So if I'm not misunderstanding you, Lungi, you're saying that this critique says that Winnie Mandela, because of the family she came from, was primed and best placed to become a leader, even in the likes of Soweto, etc. Was that what you are expressing? Okay. In her book 491 Days, Winnie Mandela writes about how her identity was stripped from her by the apartheid government, and to a certain extent the patriarchy within the struggle for freedom in this country. And she talks about how, when her husband was sent to jail, she stopped being Winnie Madikizela-Mandela, and she became just someone's wife. And she even quite, I think, powerfully writes about how they seemed to have forgotten that I'm a Madikizela, and I suddenly stopped being a Madikizela and then became someone's wife, right? And I think that in many ways that happens to women, not just in the struggle, but to women today, where we become an appendage to men, right? Where our existence is only confirmed if there is a man in our lives to witness and give that confirmation. And this is why you find, and this is the way that men construct womanhood in their minds. And this is why you find, when we're having conversations about gender-based violence and femicide in this country, men fall into the question of, what if she was your mother, your sister, your wife, right? Because it's almost like the women that deserve protection and humanity are the ones that are attached to a man in some kind of close relational way. And that if you're a woman, that is the way to legitimize your existence and your humanity in this country. Now, I think that what is important about Winnie Mandela is, a background, is that she talks about how her father, would who was a teacher when she was growing up, would teach them, would tell them this is what is in the curriculum, this is what we are being taught about, for example, the 9 Xhosa Wars, this, and then tell them what the actual truth is, but this is the truth of it, and this is what happened to our people, and that white people came onto this continent and into this country and stole land from us and are now trying to sanitize this conversation. I think that was important because in the ways in which she speaks about her father's teachings, it's almost as if he gave her a sense of ownership over the land, over her own life, and over her self-determination in the world by saying it is our land that is taken. And so when she writes about it, she speaks about how even if her ancestors might have failed during the 9 Xhosa Wars, she has considers it part of her purpose and legacy on this earth to win where they lost, right? Or where they failed. And so she takes that from the Eastern Cape, from this rural background, and takes this understanding into the urban space of Johannesburg. And I think it informs the kind of political leader that she becomes, and informs the fact that land was also a very important part. Land, the question of land was an important anchoring part of Winnie Mandela's politics, which we forget. And so I'm talking about all of this to say that the children are important, right? Because those often, as the adults in the room, in the same space as girl children or queer children, and children who the system says are not as important as other children, we need to speak life into those children in various kinds of ways that will allow them to be able to grow into particular kinds of human beings that, unfortunately, because they have to be, can be resilient against the violence that is structured to brutalize their bodies even today in 2021. So I think that's the first thing that Winnie Mandela's life it gives to us and offers as a lesson to us. But second of all, to say that when her being a married woman and a mother, when the system tried to weaponize that against her, to disempower her by removing her identity and her individualism from her and trying to cast her as someone's wife, she took that and weaponized it against the system and made herself one of the most powerful woman, mother, wife voices against apartheid during the time. So it was almost a thing of, if you think that you can take my identity and just make me Nelson Mandela's wife, then I'm going to be Nelson Mandela's wife that is going to be a thorn in your side in the ways in which I do it. And so she didn't curl in to this construction of womanhood and being a wife that was imposed upon her, but completely took it and deconstructed it and used it for her own means and for her own fight and for her own, I would like to say, glory, right? And which is why today in 2021, we can say that truly there is no Nelson Mandela without a Winnie Madikizela-Mandela. Nelson Mandela could have been, and most likely would have been, one of the forgotten heroes on Robben Island had he not had the wife that he had, right? The wife whose sense of being a Madikizela and of royal blood they tried to take from her. And she was just like, you cannot take that. And I think it's a kind of a thing of, it's not even what you call me. It is what I respond to and who I know myself to be. And I think that's such a powerful lesson for us as young women today, even as, patriarchy in various ways tries to diminish us by, even when we die, we have to be someone's mother, someone's mother or someone's sister or someone's wife. And we cannot our death cannot matter and be mournable and be grievable simply because we exist. And it's such a powerful reminder for me to say that our existence matters and that we don't have to curl into these, boxes and this diminishing that patriarchy continues to try and place upon our bodies even today.
Thanks, Nolwazi. I think we just left with 5 minutes before we go to the other video, which is the Winnie, the Banishment. Deweleng, do you have anything maybe you'd like to add or maybe comment before we start the other video?
Yes. I think firstly that was so powerful, Nolwazi. Like, yes. I think so. Mona, she was the main speaker at the ReaBua event in September. And I think following that event, she wrote a blog post, which I really thought was really important. And she was saying that what would happen if we affirmed, especially to girls, that their anger is also legitimate, right? Because we have these gender scripts, right? These constructions of femininity that say that we need to be kind, right? We need to be all of this, right? Even in really uncomfortable, unkind situations to us, these scripts of like femininity are saying that you need to be behaving in this way. And I think for me, Winnie did that, you know. She really understood her anger for the situation, her anger for the context, and really was unapologetic about it. And I mean, even with how her, you know, her father's contribution to her life, I think we need to look at that as an aspect of feminist leadership in the home space. You know, I mean, Nolazi said something really important around affirming, you know, kids, affirming women, you know, girls, affirming queer kids at home. That it's okay, that like you don't need to be bending yourself to make other people warm. You don't need to shrink yourself so that other people because other people are uncomfortable. If they are uncomfortable, then they are uncomfortable, right? This is sort of who you are and this is what you bring. And I think it's an invitation really for because there's a certain way that patriarchy also teaches us that we need to be palatable, right? It happens and it's and I think it's across different spaces, right? In white sort of spaces, we need to be palatable to whiteness. You know, so even if we want to address certain issues, we need to do it in like ways that are very diplomatic so that we don't upset, you know, people in power. In patriarchal spaces, we also need to sort of do it in ways that are you know, comfortable for the patriarchy. So men, there's a certain way, even in South Africa, right? On social media, we saw in the past week or a week, of how men want to talk about gender-based violence in ways that still make them comfortable, right? As soon as we're like, but this is we're not going to talk about issues. We're not going to talk about the fact that you're killing us, that you're raping us, that you're continuously brutalizing us, but also in ways that are still massaging your feelings, right? There's a certain way that men want us to talk about these things. If you don't talk about it like that, then it's like, oh, you know, then the discourse collapses. You're angry, and being angry, there's nothing wrong with being angry. We need to be angry, right? We need to be angry. And I think Winnie has shown us that like the anger is constructive. I think there's a way anger is constructed as this thing that isn't valid and this thing that isn't constructive, right? But anger can be constructive, and you can use anger to build. You can use anger to build a nation. You can use anger to build an army of young Black women feminist leaders, right, who are saying, but the situation is not okay, and it can't be okay, and we can't continue like it's okay. So I think that aspect is really important. I think she teaches me that that I don't always have to step out and sort of come down to address the situation, that sometimes addressing the situation as it's happening is important, and that we don't need to make ourselves palatable. Because by doing so, it's also that we're still submitting and sort of bowing down to all these systems of oppression that we are. Like I'm tired of being a palatable Black woman. I don't want to be that. I want to be a disruptive Black woman, especially in systems and in spaces that says that my life don't matter. And I think it's important, and I think for me, she represents that, and she teaches me that in my everyday activism.
Thanks, Deweleng. Thank you. It's such a very good reinforcement, actually. Without wasting any time, I would like for Sean to play us the second video, and then we continue with our discussion.
Our life has been a tremendous inspiration. It was because of that adversity that we are what we are today. And if I had to relive my life all over again, if in order that my own children and my children's children wouldn't go through what I've gone through, if I had to go through the same thing, I would do it all over again.
This was a letter written by Winnie Mandela to Nora, that's me, 17 November 1979. Our dearest friends, at the completion of my third year in exile, I have reflected about those who have made it possible for me to pull through this difficult time. So without you, I could have failed, because I knew that now I had a pillar on which I could lean, pillars which gave me the necessary miracle and the strength to maintain one's dignity. This is just a note to thank you for making it possible for me to know that I belong. Igama lami ke nguNomafa Nora Ashut. Ngo-1977 thina we're not told about ngalo Winnie. Ukufika kwakhe ke eBrandfort nathi andithi kwafika nje big truck bamdampa nje, uyabona. So ke uliyana ngale mzuzu ifika, everybody was curious. Kapha bethula bani? So sacinga ke uqesha bathula amapolisa kuba ngamapolisa ayamba ngetruck, and uyathetha moslomuntu esiXhosa. Aba naba intombi yakhe ikhona le uzinziswa. Ngenani uthethela phezulu andithi umthetho wakhe. Fakana phasi izinto kodwa ingekho bright ne ubona ba akwazeki bakwenzeka ntona.
She can't do much except go to the phone, which is the only form of communication with the outside world. She can't leave Brandfort, and that house is so dusty. The living conditions there are really terrible that we spend most of the time cleaning and disinfecting that house.
Winnie Mandela's current banning order runs out at the end of 1981, but that doesn't mean much because the Minister of Justice can renew the ban as often as he chooses.
Winnie was placed 802. Mna ke bendihlala back opposite yakhe 806 kwakwam. Xa ndiya emsebenzini esikolweni ndifuna ndigqithe apha, andinandlela yimbi, ndifuna igqithe apha kwaWinnie. So abelungu bona nabazali abasebenzi abancedisa abelungu as domestic servants babesazi bathi babalayiba ni kunomfazi olapha eBrandfort, ningake nilinge nisondele kuye, ningambulisi, ningamthethisi, likomonisi, ni ubanga banifuna ukusebenza. Now uwina kukuba ungangamthethisi umuntu omnyama, ubugqitha pha uzakukhwasa and uyakubulisa, ubulisa qala. Sakubona nkosikazi. Lendlu isenyula built ntoni yayingekho, kwakuzenza izinto ezinje zonke ne nami kwami kuphaya. Ipompo ebisetyenziswa ngumama, amanzi adithi sidibanyela 5 boku 1 2 3 4 5 ngami ne sisebenzisa itap A1 ilapha state gateini kwami. Umama uzoma apha ne uphethe imbiza, angayime apha kule ndawo ephethe imbiza. Mna ke sendisazi uba ufuna amanzi. Now bantwana ke benza izinto phambi kwakhe babaleke bahambe, bazobaleka baqithe. Ndizawucela uthumunyana wekesi, ndicela uthetha nasi eAmerica kumama okanye uthathe iAmerica umkhelela amanzi then uwagalele embizeni mntana nje wemepha nje ezeke ezikunyana nje besiza nje. laa ntatyana iseBasson Kop, uyabona. So ke phaya isereni andithi ilila ngo-9 o'clock abantu bahleli ngesitrateni phaya phezulu. UPrince lo nabangane necolleagues zakhe bahleli phaa daily. Bafika early begade everything. Andithi bayafeshkeke lapha entabeni. Umuntu ongena apha bayambona. So ke bayifensa idyadi kamama. Not only idyadi yena, saba nalo lakhe kube sonke apha safumana ifensi yamahala because of mama usuka pha eqadi. Kwenzela uba bazombona umuntu ongena apha because we're not supposed allowed to get in. Ndandiziva uba andinamsebenzi nabo ngoba andenzanga nakho nto endiyenzileyo. Qha nendibona andithi njengoba wakengena the rural kitchen utensils njenganje, ukuba ngaba ufuna mhlawumbi uboleka iketile ubeka eprimary stove, ndizothatha iketile if my son ngokusenza standard 5 6 iprimary level akekho mina ambona kumamani nazinto. So ke nam ndinceda umuntu osenhlungwini eyinkosikazi.
I get really emotional when I think about Umama Winnie because I think that woman was really taken for granted. I think she wasn't appreciated enough. I think Umama was a remarkable woman, a remarkable leader, that had so many odds against her, in the particularly in the space that she was in. And we experienced that as well, But I mean, at that time, she was literally, there were other women leaders, but she was the woman leader of the time and was a threat, to be honest, to the patriarchs who were trying to drive the apartheid. She was resilient and she was powerful, she was fearless, and she spoke out.
The president of White House, go upper local. Remember the matters mañanos. Now, also say go over curious, I make it. Inkosikazi, kaume umsusana. Nenza ntoni apha la makhosikazi ngale organization. No, we are visiting the sick. Sibancede nabantu abadala. Siyabaklinela. Sibamba meetings once ngenyanga. Ngeveki. Athi ungandivumela ndikwazise kwi-friends zam. Ii-friends zam zingancedisana wasebenzisana nabo. Ndithi ke mna khawume ndizawubuza andithi kaloku likomunisile. Ngoku sabe ngokuyaphutshuka ngoku ijaji lamakhonzo ngalo ndlela. Sabambana ke. Well, after 2 days afika itruck enkulu ke ngoku indiphathela umgubo ngaba bangani bakhe bekethe uzandi introduce kuhlobo bakhe amabisi abantwana yawo into zizawuqonda nango aba bangani bakhe basipha iyard i-roll ezimnyama imaterial emnyama ne sizothunga ne-harrim zokuthunga basipha imachine zokuthunga right hayi saqhubeka ngosathunga hey kwi-region ngoku siyawina ihlale i-Brandfort rural township imisebenzi yabo emkhulu. This is the orphanage of which now it was established through those of Winnie's efforts in Brandfort. Umama ke wenza inzame. We were sponsored by Lotto. Gave 5.1 million. And that's what it contains. So emotional. By vandalize. The second best and standardized clinic there. It be in a toilet na yonke into. Yeah, as you hooligans is just and did you want to know about 2 hours? You couldn't buy inside. You wanted to buy 2. Next to his corner for one was bayaqhubeka le Local Clinic some of the friends zakhe beze ukuza nje just bazojika babone uba wenze ntoni the remains sisahawini. Everything in Brandfort, as I said earlier on, it was just there was that change. And the children, if any child is passing through Winnie's house, being dirty or uncombed, Winnie would just follow after school, say, you must come here after school. Winnie would follow that child to her home, to go and speak with their mother, and then say, Mama, you must get to my house. So the children were so nice, even the appearance of those children were so nice. They were progressing very well. Because if they're having no books, no what, the children, they know that my mother is not working and so on, but Winnie would buy books, everything that is needed.
Singayisusa nini na wenomzamo sicela amandla wenomzamo sicela amandla wenomzamo Madikizela sicela amandla. That is a song that radical Black feminists sing when it seems like in Yobana, no, Shubile. We get strength just by singing about her name. We also have a problem of just being all about words in this country. Oh, she multiplied. Oh, Mama Winnie this, all that. But really, how are we literally multiplying? How is that multiplying becoming impactful in changing society in the sense of the things that Mama Winnie stood for? And that's what we need to do. We need to continue raising the flag of Mama Winnie. Her name must never be erased. Like, I refuse for that woman's name to not be in the history books. If it wasn't in the books of apartheid, we must put it in our books that our children and grandchildren will read about her name. It's about time we start, not being enablers of the erasure of women who fought, and who really contributed to where we are today. And she's one of those women that we must never make sure that Ikama like it is not erased. And we must build in her name. Write in her name, tell stories in her name, create plays in her name, go out and advocate in her name, and many other women that she also stood with. And I believe that that's how Mama Winnie will multiply, because when we are also gone, other kids will see plays and see writings and whatnot of her and continue to multiply in her spirit.
False truths cross an uncrossable boundary in the realm of paradox. A lie is a lie, and a truth is a truth. Irrefutable existence, and yet they refute. That the land of the Sutu, tribe led by an unshadowed widow, flattened by the all-knowing trespasser, using God's name in vain, using so-called false truths of a land uninhabited, and the non-existence of a Black woman who led, whose noble rule of truth that shamed them down to the exposure of their lives.
So hello, new background. So I'm trying to find a very peaceful place where I'm at. So I hope everybody understands. But that was very fruitful, and every time I watch that, this is probably the fifth time I watch it, and I get teary. I still get teary. I don't know. It's as if she's being introduced for the first time every time I watch it. It's like a reintroduction, yet every time it just triggers something as a woman, I guess. But if I can just jump to you in Debaling, right? Because I would actually any of you can jump in, but I like to specifically look at health equity, the fellowship, health equity fellowship. Why is it that this specific, documentary relates so much to health equity in South Africa for women, especially?
Um, so I think everything in our society is a health equity concern. It's a public health concern. Gender is a social determinant of health. So is inequality, and yeah, I mean, even in the film, I think Mamnora says something about the house being dusty, and sort of the conditions, and I think it goes back to what we we're speaking about earlier, what Nolas was saying around, the construction of townships by the apartheid government, and even today, and how, as places of Lahla Bantu, right? And I think that also reflects in a health equity argument as well. I mean, when we look at mining towns, for instance, right? Right now in present day South Africa, that we have these really big mining institutions that are getting so much money, and the atrocity is not even just the disposability of the people that work in mines, but also the impact that those mines have for people in those communities. And I think that also just reflects, I think, I think this really shows us that, gender is a social determinant of health equity. I mean, the children who are at who stayed in that community. I mean, Umamnora also mentions about Winnie making sure that the children, they also have food and stuff. And I think when we talk about health equity, when we talk about gender, and the intersections of health equity, of gender, of class, of race, I think the question on food insecurity is one that we don't talk about a lot in South Africa, about how so many communities, so many poor and marginalized Black communities, Black townships, Black rural areas in South Africa, there's a huge food insecurity challenge. And I think it also just reflects there, right? Even, Winnie mentions, Mam Nora talks about when Winnie mobilized, right? And also just reflects Mam Winnie as an organizer, right? As a community organizer, how she mobilized people to bring food and sort of assist in that. I think she was also addressing a health question, right? A question of malnutrition, a question of food insecurity. And I think it's so important that we're beginning to now understand and look at health as a social justice issue, right? And not through a clinical perspective only, but as a social justice issue. Health and access to health and healthcare, and everything that determines one's access to being healthy, right? And not just being free from sick, as the World Health Organization illustrates, but everything outside of that, how we're feeling. The fact that, like, in and we've mentioned this as well, right? The fact that the unsafety, for instance, the unsafety aspect of not being able to take a run or take a jog, right? It also is a health equity challenge. It's a health equity question, especially in South Africa, where people talk about where there's just a lot of, like, lifestyle diseases, for instance. That is a health, the conditions that make those things isn't just the fact that people are eating sugary drinks, right? It's also the conditions in which people are spaced and people are left to be there. So I think it's really great that even there we're beginning to see that health is a social justice issue, and not just the absence of not feeling sick. And I think more than anything, we can even bring it here to the context of the pandemic, right? That it has illustrated just how much of a of a social justice issue is. That is inherently feminist in its nature. That is inherently, for the most marginalized, most erased, and most, I guess, forgotten people in our communities and in our society broadly.
Thanks, Deba. For you, Noloizi, do you think that you can link this documentary to racial equity within your fellowship and your experience? as a practicing journalist?
Absolutely. I think that we need to understand that, white supremacy works hand in hand with patriarchy in various kinds of ways. And so you can't have a conversation about patriarchy without having a conversation about white supremacy. And you can't have a conversation about, Winnie Mandela without discussing patriarchy and white supremacy as well. So definitely racial equity is an important part of the conversation about Winnie Mandela's life and her legacy, is a very important part of a conversation around patriarchy, and an important part of a conversation about health equity. At the ReaBua dialogues in Cape Town a few weeks ago, one of the panelists, her name is Kitumetse, I forget her surname, but she's a social worker, and I think she's with the Black Feminist Caucus, if I'm not mistaken. But she was talking about how it is that she constructed the notion of social work, and she said that social work is about capacitating our humanity, our communities, right? And I thought that was such a powerful way to describe what social work is, and as we know, Winnie Mandela was a social worker. But I thought it was such a powerful way to describe what social work is, because it then frames health equity, as Debeleng has just said, as more than just a question of access to health services, and more than just a question of physical well-being, but a question of agency and a question of freedom, right? And which then speaks to social justice and the kind of society in which people are existing in. And so when we're having a conversation about health equity in South Africa and most of the world, we have to speak about racial equity. The two cannot be separated. And I think that and I think that's the genius of the Atlantic Fellowship program, which all of us are part of, with you guys being the health fellows and me being a racial equity fellow, is the understanding that all of these things are interlinked and are co-determinant, right? Health equity cannot be achieved without social justice, and social justice cannot be achieved without racial equity. And so all of these things are interlinked, because the people, the human beings that we're talking about, the bodies that we're talking about, all of these things exist in our bodies and happen in our bodies at exactly the same time. We cannot disaggregate who we are. We cannot disaggregate our race from our gender and from our general state of well-being. And a general state of well-being is, I love Ndebeleng said that it's not being free from sickness. When we talk about health equity, we're talking about being well, right? And you cannot be well if you are not free, right? If you do not have agency, you cannot be well, and therefore you cannot be healthy. And this is what we need to begin to understand. So in terms of this documentary and racial equity, yes, absolutely. And I think the links for me are very, very clear. And I think that it's also what this documentary and both of the documentaries we've watched today make clear to me, is that Winnie Mandela understood the intersections and the interlinking sort of connectedness of the idea of being a health worker, of being a social worker, the idea of health equity, and how it's so closely linked to freedom and so closely linked to the kind of society that Black people and the most marginalized people and most vulnerable people and communities in this country, that all of this is interlinked, which is why when she is in Brandfort, she doesn't just concern herself with building a clinic, right? She ensures that there's a creche, because she understands that early childhood development is also part of a conversation around health equity. Mamnora talks about how she ensures that people have food, and they open up a soup kitchen, right? Which is, Ndebeleng was just saying, it's also a matter of food security and food insecurity, and all these various facets of being a human being. And what does that then mean in a society that chooses to brutalize and oppress you because of either your gender or your race, right? And for me, I think that this is very important for me to say, is that I was heartbroken watching the second film, where you saw how dilapidated the clinics and the creche and the orphanage that Winnie built in Brandfort, and how dilapidated they've become, and generally just stripped and a big complete completely useless now. That was heartbreaking for me, because I think for me it speaks to the kind of government that we have right now, and the people, the leaders that we have right now, who would allow for such important health services and social services to be laid to waste, in communities that really truly need them. I believe that the ANC government should be ensuring, in order to keep its own legacy alive, and not just the legacy of Mom Winnie Mandela, to ensure that that creche should still be operational, that clinic should still be operational. And to see that those things are in the state that they're in really breaks my heart. And it also says to me that even as we are no longer living in an apartheid state in particular kinds of ways, we are still living with the state that does not care about health equity, that does not care about the most vulnerable members of our society. And this is a thing that I think we need to find gravely concerning, and something that we should be very, very angry about.
Thanks, Noloizi. So just jumping into there, it makes sense what you're saying, and I really, really, I agree to it. That the structures which are supposed to be, emblems of freedom for especially women in South Africa, they've become nothing. But I think it reiterates Debeling's point of those places being places of dump, and because they're places of dump, nobody will care. And this government not understanding that these are the places that are supposed to be taken care of, so that we do not see townships as places of dump, but rather, places where actually hope, is there, because Mam Winnie was invictus while there. So it makes sense. Just in that point, I want to go back to I think it was Dibeling's mining, or women in mining, and I think that was very important to actually raise that, and you didn't dwell on it. Whereas I think there's a specific role that mining played in women and in Brandfort. I think the fact that the township was there, and I think that Brandfort is in Welcome, and it's a huge mining town. Do you want to maybe uh, go in depth in that, Devaling?
You're muted, Ndebeling. You just muted yourself again.
Sorry. Yes, okay. I'm so sorry about that. No, I was gonna say that at some point this week, as part of the ReaBua, there actually is a specified conversation meant to discuss women in mining, and the screening of women in mining. So I think that this conversation would be better placed there. Yeah, I think the people discussing there will do the conversation way more justice than I could ever do. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you. So basically, you're dodging us. You don't want to jump in and take over. Okay, it's fine. It's okay. In I'm trying to just go back to the point that you also talked about. Can everyone hear me though?
Yes.
Okay. So the point that you talked about in terms of the structures, right? The fact that the structures of the clinic and I think it was an orphanage have been vandalized. Um, on the education side, like the curriculum side, don't you? What do you think can be done, to address such issues of recapturing information and putting it in a curriculum that can actually mean something to society, rather than you are in school and you are learning, but there are structures in front of you that you are also playing a part of in vandalizing? Don't you think maybe there's a connection to that? This is a structure, that was for a very powerful, is supposed to play a resemblance in, power and women, but in school, the curriculum itself, it sort of like plays a totally different role when it comes to portraying such women in the struggle in South Africa. So the question would rather be, what do you think maybe the curriculum should be talking about rather than what it is based on right now?
In terms of are you asking, how I think the South African history should be taught? Is that
Yes, exactly.
okay?
And also, just a question to throw out there. I mean, do we have gender studies in schools?
Well, I mean, I think the short answer to that is no. So I mean, I'm not by any stretch of the of the imagination and expert in education, and so I just want to put that out there, that this is a kind of a layman's opinion on our education system. And I think I want to, before I go into the curriculum, I want to start with my analysis of the state of our education system, as I've seen as a journalist who has covered education in this country. And the long and short of it is that our education system in South Africa is in crisis, and in fact broken in various ways and for various reasons. Our literacy rates are very low in this country, and even beyond that, our there are no structures for children to properly learn in, and the education, the basic education department has failed our children in many ways. The fact that the apartheid planning of education spatially and in terms of access continues to exist as an indictment on our Department of Basic Education, because the areas and the schools in this country that were meant for Bantu education, which was no education at all, if we're being honest, continue to suffer from a lack of resources, a lack of teachers, a lack of investment in various kinds of ways. And so this is part of what allows apartheid to continue to have what I referred to earlier on as its own lineage in this country, and for us to continue to see the impacts of apartheid, is because there hasn't been enough work done to change that in us, in the entire country as a whole, but particularly within our education system. And I mean, you have situations where Equal Education, which is a NGO, has to take the Department of Education to court to ensure that they create a set of norms and standards as to what each school is supposed to look like in terms of having a classroom and having toilets, which is outrageous. And I think that we in this country are allowed to live with such abnormal state of inequality and state violence that we don't display the kind of outrage that I think we should for certain things. It is outrageous that Michael Komape died in a pit toilet in 20 years post-democracy. It is outrageous that the Minister of Health had to be taken to court by a civil society organization in order to create norms and standards, and is still being taken to court in order to meet those norms and standards that they themselves created under duress. And so you can't even speak about the curriculum when children are learning under trees and dying in pit toilets when they're supposed to be at school. At which point are those children supposed to be in any kind of state to be able to learn what is in the curriculum? And so I think a conversation about the curriculum, whilst important, is a secondary kind of conversation. We have to look at the fact of where these children, young Black children, being taught in the first instance, and whom are they being taught by? Are the teachers being trained in properly, and teachers there to actually teach? There was a report released by the Department of Basic Education a couple of years ago around how the trade unions in the teaching space, how teachers leave during teaching hours to attend trade union meetings, because what is more important to them is what's happening in the trade union movement and what's happening in the African National Congress than teaching the children in the first instance. And so if there are no teachers teachers in the classes and there are no classes and there are no toilets for children to relieve themselves during the school day, at what point do we begin to even try and have a conversation about the curriculum, you know? And I think that's part of the problem. And even within itself, what I'm talking about, having a structure in which to sit and learn, is a matter of health equity, right? And social justice. Being able to go to the toilet to pee without facing death is a matter of not just, you know, access, but a matter of health equity, you know, because it speaks to sanitation, right? If the toilet is a pit latrine, is there water in that school? What kind of water are these children drinking? Can they wash their hands during a pandemic where washing of hands becomes a very important part of the, you know, public health drive? And for me, that's, you know, I get quite angry about that. And so when we then try and answer the second question around the curriculum and gender studies, whether or not they should be gender studies and things like that, I think that, you know, I took history throughout my schooling career up until matric. I think that it was useful to take history. I do think that history should become a subject for children that is one of the compulsory subjects. I do think, though, that we need to look at what the history curriculum is teaching children. I don't know what it's teaching children currently, but I do know, remembering from the history education that I got from a former Model C school, which had very good education outcomes, that the history education that I got was not one that captured the full complexity of the South African story and history, or the history of white supremacy, or the history of patriarchy. And it certainly wasn't a historical education that put women like Winnie Mandela, Albertina Sisulu, Ruth First in the forefront of that conversation. The history that I was taught made it seem as if we were liberated by Black men, nationalist men, mostly from the African National Congress. And as you get older, if you have any kind of interest, you find out that that is not a true reflection of the truth, and that women's stories have been completely removed and erased from, you know, South Africa's story and South Africa's history in various ways, in terms of the history that I was taught in primary school and high school. And so even as I would be someone who would advocate for history to be a mandatory subject, I think that we need to look at what kind of history is being taught. And in the tertiary sort of education space, I think that you know, there's certain courses that are done by BA and sociology students that I think should be mandatory across all degrees. And I think that a study of gender is definitely one of them, but also a study of race and racial equity. Part of the reason why we see you know, racism perpetuated by lawyers and doctors, etc., is because those people are only trained in their specific professions and specialties, and are not trained to be able to practice those professional qualifications in the society that we live in right now, in the South Africa that we live in right now, which is unequal in so many various ways. And so you find doctors and health practitioners perpetuating health inequity in this country because no one thought it important for them to learn specific things about the sociology of the space that they would be operating in. So I think that would be important. And this is why the conversation started by Fees Must Fall in 2016 becomes very important, because it invites us to think about, when we talk about decoloniality, for me, and decolonizing education, it's not a conversation of trying to unscramble the egg of colonialism. That is not possible. But it is a question of how are we wanting to educate the children and young people in this country such that when they come out of the education system, they don't just have, you know, a particular kind of formal knowledge, but also have an emotional intelligence, a sociological intelligence, a human intelligence about the world that they live in, and a human intelligence that allows them to see other people in the fullness of their humanity, and a human intelligence that allows for them to understand the importance of social justice and work towards achieving that.
Thanks, Nulwazi. Ntebaleng, can you please jump in? I know that you an education curator at professionally, so if maybe you can have anything that you'd like to add in this matter.
Um, so I think it was Thomas Sankara who said that, for us, education should mean service to Africa, right? Um, and I agree with Nolazi that we can't even begin talking about the curriculum when schools are just a danger zone. And I think even when you look at, I guess, the state of the country, right? Is there anything inspiring? Kids in grade 1 right now who are in a mud school, are they inspired by their immediate community for them to want to service that community? And I think that's important. And I think it's important because it's an invitation really to those in power, to the policymakers, to the government, to say, by deliberately disinvesting or not showing any interest in the communities that these young children are growing up in, what are we sort of saying to them about their interest and their contribution, and I guess investment, right, in South Africa, in the country. Yeah, so I think, and I think also, I mean, with the I think we need to get to a place really, with the curriculum where the gender studies, African studies, racial equity studies aren't just add-ons, but they're also part and parcel of the curriculum and the subject that people are studying themselves, right? I mean, I'll make an example. If someone studies architecture, right, and they're based in Cape Town, they okay. So in Cape Town, there's the N2, right? Yeah, and it's the sort of the main route that connects the Cape Flats to the Cape Town city center, right? And when you're traveling from the Cape Flats in the morning, right, there's sort of 3 lanes, and one of those lanes is a bus lane, right? But when you come back from the city center going back into the Cape Flats, that bus lane doesn't exist. That is a deliberate act, right? That talks to special apartheid in South Africa. That still continues, right? That represents, I guess, even Cape Town, and frames it as a colonial power or colonial project, colonial project, right? And so the people studying town planning and urban planning, if they had a curriculum that really addressed all those social justice issues without even having someone come and sort of make it a unique thing that stands by itself, but those things being reflected, I think that would have been a thing that gets questioned, because currently what it says to mostly Black people that stay in the Cape Flats going to work in the city center is to say that your lives only matter when you're going into the city center to provide labor, right? It's a reaffirmation of what the mining industry did back in the past, a reaffirmation of what apartheid did back in the past, around saying that Black bodies, right, Black people's bodies are only used for labor, right? So, and I think part of the reclaiming, and which is why I like, part of the Black radical reclaiming narrative of softness as power, even, right, that we've begun to also deconstruct our bodies as only objects of labor, right, that we constantly need to be working, and also even don't even reap the rewards of those things, right? So politicizing rest as a feminist issue, right? Politicizing rest as a racial equity rest, right? Because where in the world are Black people chilling? Like, where in the world are Black people being like, I'm resting? Even in December, we're not resting, right? You're leaving your work, you're you're going back home, right? You're there and you're working again. So there isn't, and I think there's also a huge uncomfortability around Black people, particularly Black women, resting, right? It's a thing that is also like, it gets like indoctrinated at home, that if you're just sitting, it's like, oh, you're so lazy, why are you sitting, right? And I think all those things are reflective of the society in which we're all growing up in, wherein our bodies don't say, in the current context, that they are deserving of rest, right? So that route is just an example that isn't even, it's not, one could say it's not a humanities subject, right? But it is part of, like, it's a social science subject. It's a socialization challenge. And so if we had aspects that reflected on that reflected on the kind of society that we lived in all of the streams of education, I think, that would be important. And I think, and not that even just starting at university, but starting even at, like, primary school, right? At before even kids start primary school, that they're beginning to think about those things, that they're beginning to think about gender and power, right? What does it mean? What does gender and power mean for a 4-year-old, right? In a classroom with another 4-year-old who is who is a girl, right? What are the gender relations between a boy and a girl who are 4 years old in a preschool setting, right? How are young kids who are 4 years old? I mean, we also see kids really illustrating and performing aspects of very violent, I don't want to say hypermasculinity, but then you see that this kid now has become a um they become things that they learn at home, I guess, right? So I think it's really important for those things to be part and parcel of the curriculum and not become add-ons. We shouldn't get to a point where because when they're add-ons, I think it's what happened. What we see happening, sorry, is what we see happening right now, where gender and class and race and sexuality all are positioned as things that we need to be adding on to, right? And not really as the huge thing. I mean, even in Fees Must Fall, I think the feminists in Fees Must Fall and how we got to see a huge feminist leadership in Fees Must Fall was also that gender and sexuality and class and all these things were not even class, but we're beginning to be seen as add-on things, right? So we're fighting for decolonizing society, or we're fighting for decolonizing how the curriculum, right? But the understanding of the man in that space was that the decolonizing the curriculum only says that decolonizing the curriculum by making sure that you're bringing in Black people into the curriculum, but also not talking about what has been a historical queer resistance in South Africa. How does it look like? People don't know the likes of of Bev Ditsele, all those people that have played a huge part as part of South Africa's freedom, right? And so when people talk about this decolonizing, or at least at that time, it was to say, let's replace the white figure male head with the Black figure a male head. And that still perpetuates aspects of violence, right? Because the violence of patriarchy, be it's violence of patriarchy represented by a white man, or violence of patriarchy represented by a white man, is still a representation of patriarchy. And the people that get to bear the brand are us. It's Black women, it's Black queer women, it's Black queer people, and so it's important to make sure that we're institutionalizing this narrative, so that it doesn't get positioned as, oh, the woke ones. It's not an issue of being woke, it's an issue of life and death, quite literally. And I think it's important for that to happen.
Okay, thanks, Debs. Nolwazi, okay, so in connection to the two videos, your article was very explicit about some issues. So my question to you is, what motivated you to write it? And, what are your thoughts when you are now linking it to the videos, the documentaries that we're watching right now?
Are you talking about my article about the ReaBua dialogues? Well, I mean, I think that I was I was motivated to write it because I was asked to write it, and I had been invited as Tekano as one of the guests for the ReaBua dialogues, and I was really quite honored to have been asked to write my reflections on the entire event and the ReaBua dialogues. As it relates to my article, well, I mean, I was given the task of reflecting on the day but also just, bringing in, I think, my analysis of some of my takeaways from that experience. And I think the first thing that I would like to start with is just to thank Lebogang Ramofoko for her work for the past couple of decades in this, her feminist work for the past couple of decades in this country, and in particular the work that she's now doing with Tekano, and the I think, for me, the conviction and the courage to even create something like the ReaBua dialogues, because that day for me was it was magical. It was such an incredible day, and I feel so blessed, and I'm so I have a great deal of gratitude for being part of that experience. We were in a room filled with brilliant Black women and queer women, and who are thinking deeply about this country, about the world, about equity, and about social justice. So it was a place of, I think, for me, deep thought and reflection, which is always important, but also a place of organizing, but also a place of joy. And I think for me, what I wanted to bring through in the article was all of the different sort of levels and layers of what happened to me as I experienced that day, the kind of deep thinking, the analytical and academic thinking, the reflection, how some of the conversations landed on my body and in my spirit, but also just the feeling of being in community with Black women, and how important that is, and how that space was a space where really we used Mam Winnie Mandela's a legacy and history as the backdrop to a particular important kinds of conversations. But also, Uthandi Somazwai in her conversation with Lebogang Ramofoko spoke about how each of us, it's almost like history is a song, and each of us sing in our own verse, and we get to decide what our contribution is going to be. And that was a beautiful space to be in. And so it was also a space of joy. And so what I tried to do with my article is to give people a taste of that day. And I hope that people go back to the ReaBua microsite and go and read not just my article, but also watch the films and watch, some of the panel discussions from throughout that day, which are absolutely fucking brilliant. And also so I hoped to do that, but I also hope that my article makes us take pause and really think around what kind of ancestors we want to be, what kind of legacy we want to leave in the world. What is our verse? What is our note in the song that is the story of Black women, and the song that is the story of Blackness and humanity in South Africa and globally? I think that it's important for each of us to really, truly think about that in deep, reflective ways, and use that as a roadmap for any of the decisions that we make in our lives, be it professionally and personally, to think about what kind of world do we want to leave behind, and think about how we begin to imagine and create that world today.
Okay, thanks, Nolwazi. Before I think we move on, I just also want to just have my 2 cents there regarding, I think, what you guys have, beautifully shared. I think also that I personally believe that Mama Winnie played the health equity part that Debaling was talking about. And I also think that she played the community education part, right? Where she sort of transformed the curriculum, whether you are at home and you are banished and you can't talk to people, but she was able to say, you know what, I'm going to go past that. I'm going to, be the one who actually is an angry Black feminist who is out there and saying that I'm going to make my mark, so that not just for me but for others. And in the video she does say that as long as her children and her children's children will live a better life in the future, she can do it all over again. She can relive anything that she has been through just for the sake of the children. So I really appreciate that. And I think that with all the words that came out of today, and the part of, as much as we like to use words such as she multiplied, I think that they live with us for the sake of, we need to remember that in anything that we do as women in South Africa and just globally, we know that there was once a torch that was lit for us, and the duke that we carried that day when we said she multiplied, we put it in our heads. It was for the fact that we are strong and we are black. And as we continue going forward, we will remain as strong and we will remain as black and united in whatever it is that we do. Because I think she was, in a way, uniting everyone. And as much as they tried to burn the torch, she somehow resurrected. And I think that that shows itself so much in these documentaries and also in the resurrection of Winnie Mandela in Sisonke's book, because it's quite an illustrative book that shows her journey also. Thank you for that. And I think that with the 5 minutes that we have, Debaling is going to share a poem with us that is going to close us off. Any words from Nolwazi before we move it to Debaling?
I think perhaps my closing thoughts would be thank you for having me as part of this conversation. It's been a lovely conversation, and I take I feel very honored to have been asked to be part of this conversation. And I think beyond saying what I've just said around, I think the need for us to consider what kind of world we want to leave behind and what kind of ancestors we want to be. I think that what is important for me to leave Black women with this conversation, as we look at Mam Winnie's legacy and how it relates to health equity and social justice in general, is to remember, for me, joy and rest. Because Mam Winnie, the ways in which we speak about her, we speak about this very militant revolutionary woman, which in very many ways she was. And for me, I feel like we speak about her as the woman in army uniform, fist raised in the air, which she absolutely was. A woman who makes it okay for us to have rage and anger, and for makes us understand that it is in fact righteous, and it is an appropriate response to the situation that we find ourselves in. I also want us to think about Umam Winnie as soft, right? Because I think in many ways she was stripped of her softness in ways that Black women even today continue to be stripped of our softness, which is an important part of our humanity. And so I want us, and this is why I loved the ending of the TekanoReaBua Dialogues Day, was a place of joy and softness, a place where we had analyzed patriarchy and history and brutality, and at the end we're able to put that to the side and be joyful. And I want Black women to remember joy and to remember softness, to remember that joy and softness is also our inheritance. When you look at videos of Mama Winnie laughing or dancing, for us to remember her that way as well, so that we can reinscribe ourselves into the present in those ways, in ways where we are joyful and allowed to be joyful, in ways where we are soft and are allowed to be soft and vulnerable, and all the other things that we can be outside of angry and enraged and revolutionary. And I think that we need to make time and space for that, to be soft, to be joyful, especially as we go into this time when a lot of people are going to be spending time, with their families and loved ones. I would just encourage us all to remember joy and to remember that it is our inheritance and we deserve it too. It is ours to take, and we should take it in any sort of space and moment that we can.
All right, thank you so much, Nolozi. So just before we leave with the Debaling stuff, tomorrow we have screening, same time, and it is Mam Loretta and then discussions to follow. Thank you. Take it away, Debs.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lungi. Thank you so much, Nolazi. The fists they raise in political rallies to the masses where they are called comrades is the same fist that violently lands on our mothers' faces and no one says anything about it. These same men, the heroes of the revolution, the sons of the soil, the so-called custodians of freedom and democracy, have committed gruesome atrocities. They claim to fight systems of oppression outside only to reinforce them at home. They speak of white, hegemonic, colonial, symbolic violence only for them to perpetrate it to Black women through erasure. They sparkle faces when they passionately sing, freedom is coming tomorrow, freedom is coming tomorrow, freedom is coming tomorrow. But what they don't tell us is that this freedom that they speak of is only for heterosexual men. You are pushed to the margins if you're a Black woman. You are pushed to the margins if you're a Black queer person. Oh, Mama Madikizela, just like the apartheid regime banished you all those years ago, men continue to banish us today. They have made it so unsafe for us to be in public. They have made it so unsafe for us to be at home. Oh, Mama Madikizela-Mandela, our presence gets treated like a blemish, a thing to be concealed, tucked away, fixed. We are awake in our sleep. When we do go to sleep, we are haunted by images of women in this country on the floor, bleeding, beaten, violated, missing every single day. Oh, Tina Saisaba Linda, oh Mama. They have made us so terrified to be in our homes. Although they claim that we do not matter, we know that we do. Although they slaughter our contributions and our lives, their tongue and presence and acts cutting us in pieces, they won't stop us like they couldn't stop you, Mama. Everything that you've ever done has gathered in our hearts. There's a generation of feminist leaders that you have taught to take up space. Your heart for us has become a congregation of our testimonies of learning and unlearning and challenging power. We will speak even when we are trembling in fear. We will be soft even when it's unwise to do so. We will speak truth to power like you did when the odds were against you. We won't stop. We cannot stop until cis heteropatriarchy is banished. Long live the spirit of Winnie Madikizela-Mandela. Long live. Long live the feminist spirit of Winnie Madikizela. Long live. Oh, we are rising. We are rising like you did. Dango.
Thank you.
I'm even scared to say anything. That was too powerful. But thank you so much, everyone. I think Sean is now going to cut us because I think we're over by 2 minutes. But thank you for joining us, to everybody who's joined in, and thank you for allowing me the space and also to just be part of this conversation with these two great women who are very powerful and who have been allowed to be soft and also angry, at the same time. All of us, actually. So yes, Ndebaleng, you have made it possible. And thank you so much, Nolwazi. You have also closed very well. To Mama Winnie and every other woman who is strong and who carries their strength in their heart and in their fist. Amanda.
Away to Amandala.
Thank you.
Thank you.